Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Drew Schulman.
And I'm Marie Vigourou. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 20, Pac-Man Fever. Let's get this show on the road.
I came into this episode, I don't want to say with expectations.
Ooh.
Given the title, I was like, okay, it's got to be the right level of nerdiness for me in this one. And I was afraid they wouldn't really hit it, but I got exactly what I wanted.
This is one of those episodes that you didn't really know you wanted until you see it. And then you're like, yeah, this is what I wanted, you know? It's like the hangry episode where you just need it, right?
Literally, you have a snack and you're like, oh, I was just pissed off because I was hungry and I didn't realize it.
You just needed a Snickers, you know? It's the Snickers of the series. I love it. I love it. This was also an episode that we watched with our patrons as part of our Pride Month celebration.
We did.
That was a lot of fun. That was the last one that we got to watch with them.
A very good send-off to a very fun Pride Month.
Yeah, definitely. We're looking forward to maybe perhaps doing this again because this was so much fun, you know?
There's no part of me that's going to sit here and be like, well, no, this was a fun thing to do. I like it. I like to see how we can iterate on it in the future. And also, what a way to end Pride Month, but with Charlie, the queen. I was going to say our lesbian queen, but yeah, our lesbian queen.
Yeah, our lesbian queen. I do love that. I love that. All right. This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, what was your favorite video game growing up? On the supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed. You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and claim your perks.
Okay, two things. One, this was Mary's question,
I
not
know.
mine, which I'm so proud of her for. And two, I feel like Chris and Jeremy are going to have a good time listening to this one.
I don't think Chris listens to this podcast. All right, are we ready for the recap this week?
I certainly am. Count me down.
3, 2, 1. You stole my car?
We have poor Sam not feeling well. He has what I'm calling the supernatural flu, even though it's way worse than a flu, clearly. And then Charlie shows up and she gets to be shown the bunker and eventually becomes a woman of letters, which is super adorable, even if it's just this fun title. We end up on a case that she inadvertently gets involved in because we've got some Jinn who are taking people with a different kind of Jinn. And instead of giving you your peaceful dream, they're giving you your worst nightmare. And it turns out her worst nightmare is reliving a Nazi zombie video game where actually it's not about killing the zombies and the Nazis, it's about saying goodbye to her mother. So her mother is in a coma because of a car accident that she blames herself for. Whew. This was a lot this episode, but it was mostly just Charlie being awesome and Nazi zombies and a lot of confusion and Sam learning to accept things. Time.
Thank you, Drew. This episode was written by Robbie Thompson, directed by Robert Singer, and it originally aired on April 24th, 2013.
I really felt like I was missing something in the long game. I rambled a bit longer than normal and repeated myself. I'm did I miss something?
No, that's essentially what happens, really. There's a lot of if you're just looking to tell the story, that's basically what it is. There's a lot of little moments that are really, really interesting and that we're going to be diving into right now. So in this episode, we learn a lot more about Charlie's backstory, right? So when she was younger, she got in trouble for hacking a game company. She modified the game that she stole from them to reflect her, and I quote, flaming liberal politics, and then she released it for free. So that got her into trouble already. And then one night she was at a sleepover. She got scared. She asked her parents to come and get her. And on the way there, they got hit by a drunk driver. It killed her dad, and it put her mom in a coma. And basically, Charlie has been paying for her care through stealing money from organizations that she doesn't like.
It kind of puts a button on the whole, what she's been doing with the hacking. We've known she's been hacking and, diverting funds from, shadier organizations. That's kind of been an established bit of her lore. And it, never really clicked that I should think about, what is she doing with this money? She's clearly not, loaded. And she still works a regular job, as far as we can tell. So to know that this was her, where she was funneling that money is, oh, Charlie.
So we can also see that Sam is not doing great. He's got issues with, his aim and his hair.
His two most important assets.
We get Dean's iconic line, give me 5 minutes with some clippers.
My God, if we ever see Dean give Sam a haircut, that will be the ultimate prank and will be his doom.
This episode also references the African dream route from Dream a Little Dream of Me.
That was a very fun callback of all things. The fact that we kind of went back to a previous entity, and I know while Jinn are a hot button issue with their poor representation and depiction, I can't speak for African dream route, but hey, a little bit of our botanical corner comes back for the first time in a long time.
Right. I think what's interesting here with the Jinn is that there's no real direct reference to like what Supernatural has said they are before. They're like, oh, they're a different kind of Jinn. And so like to me anyway, it felt very divorced from what they were saying that it was originally. So while Dean is rescuing Charlie from her Jinn dream, he sees Sam unconscious in a hospital bed in the same room as Charlie's mom.
I have thoughts about this.
That's actually something that you didn't mention in the recap, I believe.
You're right. I totally blanked on that little bit there.
So other than that, the episode itself is pretty self-contained, but in true Robbie Thompson fashion, we have lots and lots of little Easter eggs, right? And the first thing I'd like to call your attention to is when Charlie is doing her like outfit montage to like Walking on Sunshine. Well, that was the song that was playing when we first met her in that first episode.
Oh my God, it was. I totally forgot. I also do love the little reveal that it's completely diegetic and like Dean actually pauses the music on her phone, like to end the montage scene. Like,
yes, exactly.
Like the idea that she would actually put on a song like that in a store to have the montage moment is so Charlie and adorable.
She also mentions that she read all of the Carver Edlund books, right? So we remember that back in the early seasons, I think in season 5. And she asks Sam and Dean if the events of the books really happened.
I love that. It's so adorable. And it's like, I think I made the comment at one point that like I wanted to find her reading the book. So like to get that finally felt really good.
And during her conversation with Dean, she mentions that Castiel seems, and I quote, helpful and dreamy. And what I really love about that is that she literally just read the Carver Edlund books. So like her impressions are based off of that. Now, if we want to get a little bit meta, like why would the books characterize Castiel as dreamy? And I'm going to let you all answer that question on your own. Send us a voicemail about that, about the narration, the like narrator point of view in the Carver Edlund books. Let us know what you think about that. When Charlie holds up her fake FBI badge, she's holding it upside down, which should make all of us think of like the moment when Cass did the same thing in Free to Be You and Me. We get another callback to Charlie's first episode, the girl with the Dungeons and Dragons tattoo. And that's when she tells Dean that she loves him and he goes, I know. Because in season 7, in that episode, when she's first called into Dick Roman's office, she thinks she's about to get into trouble, right? And her coworker goes like, I love you. And she goes, I know. Which, of course, I know, is a reference to a famous Star Wars moment between Princess Leia and Han Solo. Believe me, I watched that when I was growing up, everybody. No worries. I know.
I know I come across as stupidly nerdy, but Mary's pretty damn nerdy too.
I mean, I had a dad who loved Star Wars, so there you go. We watched it a lot. This week, our theme is surrender, which comes from the old French word that combines sur, meaning like over or above, and render, meaning to give back, rendre. Basically, like this idea, if we translate it literally, would be above giving back. And so today, we're going to be using it in the sense of like having to give something up or even giving oneself up. And it's going to make a lot more sense when we start talking about the episode.
I had no idea that it was a French root for that. That's a surprise for me.
It's weird because like there's even like this idea of like se rendre à l'évidence, like bringing oneself to the evidence or like to the obviousness of a situation. And it's like se rendre, like it's very close, just like in pronunciation. And I'm not saying that it's etymologically related. That's what it made me think of. And it's, again, the idea of like surrendering oneself to the obvious, right?
It's the kind of thing where you could say it and I would not doubt it or make you like double check that. I'd be like, oh, that makes perfect sense if they were related and the same root.
No. I'm saying that they are not related. I'm not saying that I don't know. I'm saying they are not related.
Oh shit, I misunderstood. That is even crazier, they're not related. Damn.
So I'd like to start with Charlie, because she's kind of like the poster child for our theme this week. And like we talked about earlier, Charlie is really working very, very hard to keep her mom alive, right? Like she's been in a coma for decades at this point, and Charlie is just constantly stealing money in order to pay for her care. So this has to be constantly on her mind. Like it must be relentless, really, when you think about it, and the complete opposite of surrender. And so in her dream, in her Jin dream, she plays all of the levels like over and over again in order to save her mom. And just like in her life, she keeps doing the things that she needs to do in order to pay for her care.
It feels so weird to rely on my gamer knowledge for this one, but like as a gamer, it's also this feeling of doing a level over and over and knowing that you're missing something. Like it doesn't make sense that it just restarts every time. There's clearly something you're missing. And Charlie even says the dream just restarts, but harder. Another classic video game trope of the redo a level more difficult thing. And trying to find the thing you're missing to actually advance the plot and reach the next level. And sometimes you can be so buried in it that you miss the forest for the trees. And it can take a refreshed point of view or someone to help you refocus on the scene and find a new way forward, like literally surrendering yourself to an outside perspective to try something different, i.e. Dean.
Because we learn very, very quickly that the reason why Charlie refuses to let go of her mom is because she feels responsible for the state that she's in. She goes like, you don't understand. I was at a sleepover and I got scared. So I called my parents to come and get me. They should have never been driving that night. And that guilt is weighing on her like very, very heavily. And Dean, obviously, who knows a couple of things about guilt, immediately goes like, it wasn't your fault. And this is where Charlie breaks down and says that she just wishes she could tell her mom that she's sorry and that she loves her, like, just one more time.
Yeah, like, it leads to one of the most tear-jerking endings to an episode, and we've had some pretty tough ones recently. To see Charlie, like, say goodbye in her own way, connecting with her mom on a very, like, important personal level, letting her go and letting her know how she feels in this way. And yeah, like, you can never really know whether her mother is hearing this or getting the goodbye that Charlie's trying to give her. But I think this is the point where Charlie finally accepts and understands that she has to let go. She has to surrender this, that she can't just keep this infinite loop going. And, a final goodbye is all she really wanted. So she has this goodbye, which from an outside perspective, is just as meaningful as a personal goodbye.
I mean, it was really, really lovely to see her reading, like, The Hobbit to her, right? Like, that was really lovely. And I think it also shows, I mean, I think I've talked about my thoughts on closure before, right? But, like, I think, to me, it really shows, like, that, again, closure comes from within, doesn't actually come from an outside perspective.
1000%.
I think also in an episode where we talk about surrender as our theme, right? I think we really have to take into account that fear is actually an emotion that's really, really heavily featured and discussed in this supernatural episode. And it makes me think about the relationship between fear and surrender. And it almost feels like they're intertwined, right? Because like, I can't really think of a moment in my life where I've like surrendered to something. And I wasn't completely like gripped by fear. Like, if you're not afraid of the thing, you just do it. But if you're afraid of it, then you have to like take a leap of faith and surrender to a certain degree.
Well, yeah, like fear is such a powerful emotion because it's one that like can be so hard to reckon with and is linked to so many other feelings that are just often considered to be things that are outside of your control. And I think the important part for me, at least here, is like losing her mother as well as not being able to truly tell her a proper like sorry and goodbye is what she fears, and her acceptance that that thing that she needs to move on allows her to surrender and find her own way forward. Like, well, I feel like, how do I put this into the best words I can? Yes, it's fear, but it's a different kind of fear than I think we usually think about in these kind of scenarios. But it is still surrendering to a fear, and the fear being allowing herself to move on without her mother and not being able to say the goodbye that she wants to say.
Do you have any other thoughts about like what kind of fear as opposed to like the fear that we usually mean?
I think the difference here is when you described, having to surrender yourself and take the leap of faith into something you're scared of. I'm having trouble putting this into words. Like, I know what I want to say, but I can't get around it properly. But I just, like, it's almost like you're either accepting something that you like, surrendering yourself to fear and accepting something, versus here, her fear is accepting something. So accepting it is conquering the fear. It's almost like there's a step removed in the. Am I making any sense at all? Is this complete gibberish?
So the thing with fear, in order to be able to either, I mean, I kind of hate the word conquer for so many reasons, but like in order to move on from a fear, overcome a fear, I think is a great way to say it. The first step is to acknowledge the fear, right? To accept the fact that you are afraid of that thing. And I think like that was what Charlie was doing, right? She accepted that she was afraid of losing her mother. And I don't think that the fear so much was to lose her mother, but the fear was to never be able to tell her those things. And so she had to accept that she never would do that. And surrender herself to the faith that even if her mother never hears those words, she already knew. Just like Dean tells her, right? She knew that.
It was the accepting that she could not have the outcome she desired.
A lot of the time, that's what surrender is about, right?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Fuck.
or accepting the fact that you have very little control over the outcome, right? A lot of the time, that's it too. Well, speaking of having little control over the outcome, I do feel like we should move on to Sam, because Sam is going through a very interesting arc this week that definitely starts at the opposite of surrender, just like Charlie. So the episode starts and we can immediately tell that he's unwell, right? And I just love that the show decided to show that to us by picturing him disheveled. Sam is known for his beautiful long hair, and anyone with long hair knows that like if you don't actually do your hair, it just won't always look good. But Sam's hair always looks good, right? So like and whether you think that Sam's hair is handsome or whatever your feelings are about Sam's hair, it is always well kept and well groomed, right? So that's what I mean. Either Sam has like special magical hair that like just always looks kept and groomed and nice. That's option number one. Or option number two is that he does his hair every day, right? And here, since we're seeing him like with a bad hair day, it becomes very apparent that he actually does his hair every day.
Sam has officially surrendered to the supernatural flu and let his hair care treatment falter. But it's true, like seeing Sam in this state does a lot to tell us as an audience how he's holding up, or his lack of holding himself together more so. Because you're right, we've never seen him really with a bad hair day, despite the countless things he's been through, which I think means we can officially close the book on supernatural magical hair powers.
I mean, again, send us a voicemail, if you have strong feelings about that. I think that this kind of like contrast is really helpful in showing like how when someone's not doing well, right? And Dean clearly notices the hair. And that's when they start arguing about it. And like and to be clear, they're not fighting, but they are calmly disagreeing. Like Dean says that Sam isn't well enough to go on a hunt, and Sam disagrees with his whole chest, mind you, but he disagrees. He's very much like clinging on to the idea, the wrong idea, again, mind you, that he's fine. And he tries to show Dean that he is fine by shooting at a target, and it doesn't go very well for him, right? As we remember.
Like, he's plainly refusing to surrender to his situation and is fighting a evidently losing battle, which we ultimately see as his near downfall this week. His body is asking him to stop and rest, and I know, like, I keep referring to this as like, like a regular sickness when it clearly isn't. But like, with what they know and how things are going, it's really all they have for him now.
So we were talking about this, I think, during one of the live watches, and the reality is that Sam doesn't have like a quote unquote regular sickness. I do think though that we can and we should look at it through the lens of disability, because he is in the process of developing a disability through this, right? Like, he used to be able to shoot with proper aim and now he can't. He used to be able to do certain things that now he can't. He gets really tired really easily, like he has physical symptoms. So anyway, I think that there's definitely something to be said about that, and I'm gonna make sure that we get to that before the end of this season. So even after he's proved wrong, right, he persists, because our little Sam persists. He shows up at the hunt, even though Dean had clearly told him not to. And Dean is actually so upset by this that he leaves in the Impala, and he leaves Sam and Charlie to fit in Charlie's tiny little yellow car.
Sam in a compact is the ultimate punishment in my books. But how unfair to Charlie, making her ride around town with an under-the-weather moose?
Dean was like, oh, you know what? You didn't want to do this? Then there goes your leg room, Like, he's like, there you go. We're not doing this anymore.
I imagine his headroom, too.
Oh,
I just imagine Charlie driving because skrunked.
I think it was Rochelle when we were watching. She was like, clown car. And I was like, yes, absolutely.
Yes! Clown car for one.
So anyway, all of this kind of culminates when Sam is struggling to kill the two Jins, right? Because he doesn't know that there are two, so he kills the first one, and then there's a second one. And so he has to come to the conclusion that he's not actually fit to hunt, and that the trials are, in fact, negatively affecting him. And this is really the moment when he finally surrenders to basic logic. I'm kind of annoyed with Sam in this moment. I understand lots of love and empathy for him, but definitely a little bit of annoyance. And he tells Dean, okay, you were right. I should have laid low. I know. I should have hung back.
The amount of my wife I see in this, of the, like, taking care of others and making sure everyone's safe and okay, but, like, oh no, I can run myself ragged and do a million things until I literally, like, am dead. Because that's how Sam's going right now. And like, it's nearly too late when he figures it out that, like, he's been being told all episode, which everyone was right about, that he needs to take a break. Like, at least he's accepting that he's not in the right shape to be hunting, and maybe will actually get some rest and maybe do some more work from the bunker type stuff, like, next week. Like, let him have the rest he needs and do the work he can while not pushing himself.
Yeah, and I think this is where it gets interesting, right? Because it's not like a good night's rest can actually fix how he's doing. And it's not like a little bit of soup is going to help him feel better. This is like, again, this is a chronic thing. This is the thing that is going to be following him until there's some sort of resolution, right? And we were talking earlier about how fear is really linked to surrender. And there's a part of me that's like, because I think it's implicit in the episode, but like, what is Sam afraid of? What is his fear that he has to surrender to?
The obvious, like, no context answer is the side effects of the trials. They're making him weak and worse for wear, even a liability on hunts, as we've seen. But, like, more so, I think the answer is surrendering to himself and his need to be involved and on the front lines. Like, Sam is not used to being on the bench. He spent a lot of years of his childhood not being allowed to hunt with Dean and his father. And here he is having to relive that, like, I'm just sitting here, like, on the sidelines while everyone else is doing the work.
I think that's something that's really, really interesting. Like, that fear of being sidelined, that fear of missing out, for crying out loud. I think we can call it what it is. I also think that there's an element of, like, what will happen with the third trial? Because clearly he is getting worse. And so what is actually going to be the cost of the third trial? I think that's the fear.
This really feels like we're lining up one of those, like, okay, the gates can be closed, but Sam's not going to make it. Dean, which do you choose, your brother or closing the gates? Fortunately, knowing where we are in the series and what remains of the series, I have a guess which way Dean's going to lean on that one.
So let's talk about Dean for a second, because I find that Dean's arc is actually really interesting and definitely a little bit more subtle than Sam's, right? And I particularly like it so much because so much of it is unsaid. And I think that it asks a lot of questions without necessarily answering them, which I really love personally. It leaves room for interpretation in a way that I really appreciate.
Go on, I'm curious. What have you got for us this week?
So, like we said earlier, Sam and Dean are disagreeing about Sam's fitness to hunt. And in the past, when Sam and Dean have disagreed, Dean has usually been like very, very loud and very, very domineering about him being right. And to me, it almost felt like he was acting this way because that's what he'd seen John do, right? Like, and that's what he was repeating. I remember actually talking about this with you in season 4 when Dean punches Sam in the face when he finds out that he's drinking demon blood. But here, Dean isn't doing that at all. He's actually respecting Sam's actions, even though he knows, and we know as the audience, that he's the one who's right. He is right, literally the righteous man again. But he is really letting Sam make his own decisions. He's very upset about it, but he doesn't let his anger take over his entire being, right? So instead of yelling at Sam, he like tries to show him that he's unfit by like taking him down to the shooting range. And instead of like shouting when he sees him at the crime scene, he like removes himself from the situation. And I like, what growth? That's like, wow. Because that means that he's actively healing from past trauma. And I'm just so proud of him for that.
Amen. The pride, so there. And it's amazing because it brings me back to a previous episode a few weeks ago when Dean didn't get his way with Chrissy, but accepted it and laid down some amount of support for her in the form of Garth visits. And he too did not get the outcome he desired, but found a way to work with her. And now Sam is being a bit more stubborn than Chrissy, but Dean is handling it, like you said, like a champ. He's not getting angry. He's being stern, but not yelling. Like, the shooting range testing is so brilliant. Like, giving Sam irrefutable evidence that something is wrong and he needs to, like, evaluate that in himself. Oh.
Like, let's be clear. Usually I'm like, well, they each have really good points. In this case, Dean is right. Period. End of paragraph. Like, there you go. Done.
Hard return. Page break.
100%. So... okay, so now I really want to talk about that moment in the hospital in Charlie's dream when Dean sees Sam unconscious on the hospital bed. Because we talked about Charlie's fear of losing her mom. She feels guilty, she feels responsible for her accident, and she just can't let go of that. Now, for Dean to see Sam in a similar position, we have to assume that he has similar feelings surrounding Sam right now. Like, he feels guilty and responsible for what's happening to him, and he closes the curtain without really saying anything. Like, he manages to convince Charlie to let go of her mom by saying things like, "You're afraid of losing her. She's already gone. You gotta let it go." Now, lately, we've talked about how Dean was so intent on closing the gates of hell that he was willing to sacrifice, or one might say, surrender his own life in order to get it done. But the question, I think, here shifts to, does Dean want to close the gates of hell so bad that he is going to be willing to sacrifice or surrender his little brother to this cause?
I had this exact same thought. The parallel the show is giving us between Charlie's mother and Sam, that both are, air quotes, beyond saving and living on borrowed and limited time. I think, like I said just before, the show is setting us up for a moment in which Dean will need to pick between closing gates or his brother. And again, my hunch is Sam makes it past this season from what we've seen, but at the same time, we've seen them both die a dozen times, so...
apparently, death doesn't really mean anything in Supernatural, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Sam has already come back from the dead a couple of times, so...
hearts mean things, death doesn't. I'm taking over Critical Time this week because I am obsessed with a nerdy urban legend that, from my understanding and minor research, this show does not ever touch. Though Mary has said the X-Files may do so a little bit, so I'm looking forward to that. But I don't foresee a better time to bring up this story other than today, So I want to discuss the legend, or the urban legend, of the infamous arcade cabinet Polybius. A game cabinet for Polybius has been found in multiple arcades around mostly Portland, Oregon, and neighboring states during the boom of new arcade games in around the early 80s, 81. Stories from kids who played it describe weird sensations like a hypnosis or a loss of sensory. And along with the odd side effects from playing the game, there were also reports of like mysterious men in black collecting data from said machines. And like, it bums me out that this mysterious machine may not have ever existed. It's widely believed to just be like a schoolyard level rumor. The only evidence of its existence are stories. Any photos or digital files from the game that exist are purely recreations. You know, nothing original. Some have even speculated it was confused for other games long forgotten from that time that kind of just flew under the radar, or like people remember the game but not the name and just put the two together in their stories. However, the legend of the infamous Polybius lives on and has sparked the creation of films such as The Last Starfighter, and as I said earlier, may apparently be tied to an X-Files episode, and a lot of other media has played with it as well. But urban legends like this are so tantalizing because we get to hear about these things that, like, while they may be assumed to be rumors, there's nothing saying it didn't happen. There's no official proof that it doesn't exist. It's just questions. Maybe there was some unknown small arcade machine with graphics and sound so peculiar it left players shaken. Maybe some men in black did learn about it and look into it for whatever reasons, and eventually this machine was lost to time with no photos or records left behind. I mean, we've had lost media before, films and TV shows that we are aware of that just no copies exist anymore, but vague memories and stories. So why not an arcade machine? Spooky or not.
This is actually making me think of the fact that there are currently very large archives that are being just simply deleted off of the internet. And I know that we're making, like, I don't want to say it like something humorous, let's say, about this little segment here, but like archive deletion is actually like really awful. And it creates these kinds of situations where, because the reality, anyway, there's a lot of it's really easy to problematize, anyway, to problematicize.
I'm not sure I know I know what you mean to say, but I'm not sure the actual pronunciation of the word.
Archives can be problematic because of who does the archiving, who does the interpretation, like, anyway. So there's a lot of things to be discussed when it comes to that, but archives are really like a way to remember certain things that human memory would not be able to remember. And so, if you hear about anything where people are saying we should delete this archive to make room for whatever, like, just say no. Just say no to archive deletion.
I gave an example in this story very briefly, but there is an amazing project happening now in the Doctor Who community trying to recover lost episodes that essentially the BBC was just like, we're done with this. We don't need to keep a copy, and destroyed it. Or to either make space, they burnt it or deleted it. And we're luckily finding people who happen to have worked there in their young age and made a copy, or when they were told to get rid of it, kept it just in case because they were fans. And we're now getting to recover some of this lost media. But there are full-on episodes of Doctor Who, and I'm sure that's just the example I have. There must be other shows in that era that just nobody thought to keep around. So yes, it aired on TV. People saw it, but unless someone happened to keep that piece of media when it was meant to be disposed of, it's gone.
There are huge movements also of people who want to digitize certain archives, which, to be fair, I don't think is an issue per se, but it becomes an issue when you digitize any kind of artifact and then get rid of the originals, right? Because that's what happens a lot of the time, unfortunately. And then people just later on decide that the digital archive doesn't need to be kept. And so anyway, there you go. That's my little soapbox about archiving.
I love that I got to bring this up, one, for myself, but two, to be able to bring that up as well, because yeah, it is incredibly important to keep records, to archive things. Yes, make digital copies. Keep both. This week we have a message from Astrid. Before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail to respond to anything we discussed today or ask us a question. You can use the recording app on your phone and email us that recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com.
Hi, my name is Astrid. I use they, them pronouns, and I may sound like a child, but I am 23 years old. With that being said, I watched your newest episode today, episode 12 of season 8. And the Swiftie to Supernatural pipeline, or the Supernatural to Swiftie pipeline, really needs to be studied. And there also need to be a lot more edits of Supernatural to Taylor Swift songs. I digress, though. I was watching, because I'm doing my own rewatch of the series. So I just watched episode 14 of season 8. And Sam says to Dean that Dean is the best hunter he has ever seen. And it makes me think about Dean surviving purgatory. I truly don't think John could have done something like that. I understand that John can handle being tortured. We learned this in earlier seasons when we learn about Dean being the righteous man. But in my opinion, John was not a good hunter. And from the start of the show, episode 1, season 1, Dean is a good hunter. And as torturous as it was for him, going to hell made Dean a better hunter. And in my opinion, I think after going to purgatory, it made him the best hunter. And Sam agrees. But yeah, I'm curious as to who you guys think, out of all the people we have met in Supernatural up into this point, who do you think would be able to survive purgatory for a year straight like Dean does? And like Dean does, as in not just surviving because he's alive, but also surviving in the sense of we don't see him being truly mentally screwed over by surviving purgatory. Because in my opinion, if Sam were to have switched places, I think he would have came out mentally tweaked. I know that's not the proper term and that's not the proper usage, but I don't know how else to word that to make it sound correctly. So yeah, I'm just curious if Dean can survive for a year. Who else do you think would be able to do this? Thank you for doing this show. I appreciate everything you do. And Drew, I can't wait to see you react to season 15, the last 3 episodes. Because I myself, even though I'm on my 6th rewatch since the show ended, I cannot get through those episodes without crying. So I'm excited to see what's to come for the rest of the show. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Hey, Astrid, thank you so much for this voicemail because I think it's a really, really good question. Okay, and first off, I do want to respond to your Supernatural to Swiftie pipeline comment. And I think that, yes, people should be making lots more Supernatural edits to Taylor Swift music, particularly with the new album. I feel like I haven't seen all that many on TikTok, although maybe that's just because I haven't been on TikTok all that often. But anyway, I also digress. So the question that you're asking us is like, who do we know from the show do we think would be able to survive for a year? And I think that there are a few hints at that throughout this season, because you say that you think that Sam would not have, let's just say that he wouldn't have escaped unscathed. Let's put it that way. First off, I completely agree. And second, I think we get a little bit of that when in Citizen Fang, actually, when Dean tells Sam that, you'll be lucky to get out alive if you find Benny. And he turns to Martin and he's like, he's going to kill you, right? Like, I remember that very, very clearly. And keep in mind that, like, I always think of like Dean and Benny as evenly matched when it comes to like fighting. So I think that Sam would be lucky to get out alive from purgatory. And here I might say something a little bit controversial, but not necessarily because he is a worse hunter or a worse hunter than Dean, but because Dean had an actual support system in purgatory. He had Cass and he had Benny. And Sam, like, would have had no one as far as we're aware, right? And like in if we really look at the way that Dean lived in purgatory, it was his ability to create a relationship with Benny that got him out alive and unscathed, right? And I'm just unsure that Sam would have been able to create that kind of relationship with somebody in purgatory. There's also another thing that I want to mention. It's the fact that like Dean didn't only survive in purgatory. I think you could make the argument that he thrived there in many ways because of what we talked about, I think last episode or the episode before, where I was saying that like he didn't have to mask anything, right? Purgatory is pure for him. He can really be himself. And so I think in that way, Dean was able to thrive in purgatory in a way that Sam simply would not have. And again, I hesitate to say that it's because like one is a better hunter than the other, but I just think that like this is about like almost their personalities and their disposition almost as human beings more than it is about their hunting skills. And I don't know, maybe people disagree with that. Just let me know. But anyway, thank you so much for this voicemail. It really made me think about a bunch of stuff. Thanks again.
Seriously, Astrid, what a brilliant voicemail and a great thought experiment. On the topic of the Swiftie pipeline, yes, we need more fan edits, and we briefly discussed this last week. I think off air, Mary and I, where we were talking about non-human biologics, and they were talking about how like they got into certain music through like anime music videos, and I did the exact same thing. So I'm just thinking of like the number of like Swifties who might like get into Supernatural or vice versa because of those music mashups need to happen. As far as other hunters surviving purgatory, I think, Mary, first of all, an amazing point you made in the fact that I think Dean did so well because of who he is and how he was able to be so pure, which also I think helped to make the connection with Benny because there was no masking or any kind of fakery. They were both able to be such honest characters with each other. And I don't know if other hunters that we know would have that same opportunity in purgatory. I also wonder if having his history of being tortured in hell and then comparing that to being somewhere less vile, I guess, is a weird way to put purgatory. But I guess when compared to hell, it kind of makes sense. If it's almost like if I could survive hell, I could survive this. So there's a bit more gumption there than most people would have. Because you're right, John would screw something up and be dead within like the first hour, maybe 45 minutes. Sam, like we discussed, I forget again if it was last week or the week before, is much more brain over heart. And while he doesn't have like poor instincts or like bad reactions, he relies on the research, the knowledge, the knowing things. So being somewhere where there is so much new information to gather, he would need that time to like research and figure things out, and maybe could come out the other end okay. But I think if we had to like take bets on which one would come out more affected by the experience, I think it would be Sam in a negative way, maybe. I'm the weird example I want to give is Jumanji. When Robin Williams comes out of the game and he's like a feral beast man.
Oh, yeah.
I see Sam coming out with a huge beard and like messed up and like freaked out by everything, but perfect hair still nonetheless.
He would have no hair products in Purgatory, just saying.
But his magic supernatural hair would be even more powerful in Purgatory.
Well, then that would prove that theory, just saying.
We don't know. No one's proved us wrong yet. Voicemail, I'm waiting. But I do want to say, and I almost think like just, it's the kind of thing the show would do to us. Garth would come out of there unscathed with like 4 new friends and not a single scratch on him. And like, it would never be explained why or how. He would just be like, I figured it out. Like, what do you mean you figured it out? Like, I figured out how Purgatory works and I left. Like, what? Because that's just Garth. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's Garth. And to not drag this on for too long, I will touch the last subject, which is, those last 3 episodes, there's definitely like, I need like the graph of like how I thought I would handle that going forward, or how I think I thought I would. And like, the more I get to episodes that break my heart and crush me, especially in this season has had quite a few of them, I get more and more worried every time. And given that we're only a little over halfway, I can only imagine how many more heartbreaks I will have between now and then. And how unready I will be for those 3 episodes. For all of this, thank you for a lovely voicemail.
So what's your reflection and call to action this week?
I taught myself at some point to like not let fear stop me from doing stuff. I'll still like look at something dangerous and like judge whether it's safe to do and not be an idiot. But there's a difference between like scary and unsafe. So I remind myself this week that like I can overcome my fear and do anything. Like if I believe in myself. I know that sounds very self-helpy, but it's something I really do believe in. And the only thing to fear is fear itself and maybe monsters. And your reflection and call to action this week?
You know, I think that this episode reminds me that it's much easier to talk somebody else through their fear of something than it is to really recognize them in yourself and surrender to them. And so I think that I'm particularly good at like walking people through certain things, and sometimes I am really, really useless when it comes to walking myself through them. So my call to action is to sometimes get a little bit of distance from like me, if that makes sense, and just try to look at the situation from like an outside perspective and be like, what advice would you give yourself if you were somebody else? Because I think that sometimes I should do that a little bit more.
This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Marie Vigouroux and myself, Drew Schulman. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music, and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber, and for our merch store and socials. And write us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.